A billionaire CEO hires a nanny for his children, and at 2 a.m., he's about to discover the secret she's been hiding in his own home office, one that will either save his empire or destroy everything he's built. 2 a.m. The penthouse was silent, except for the low hum of climate control and the distant pulse of the city 40 floors below. Miguel Gaynor had built his fortune on patterns, reading market trends, anticipating competitor moves, identifying vulnerabilities before anyone else could exploit them. But tonight, his own mind betrayed him. Sleep wouldn't come. It hadn't come in weeks. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his bedroom, staring out at the glowing grid of Manhattan, watching his reflection merge with the city lights. Apex Dynamics, his company, his legacy, the thing he'd sacrificed his marriage, his peace for, was hemorrhaging. The cyber attack had started small, a whisper in the firewall logs. Now it was a roar. His $5 million security team had quit yesterday. The board was circling. He had 72 hours, maybe less, before Chimera Group forced a hostile takeover. He needed to think. He needed air. He needed a sound, faint, rhythmic, the soft, deliberate click-click-click of fingers on a keyboard, coming from the direction of his home office. Miguel's pulse quickened. His office was biometrically locked. No one had access except him and his now former security chief. He moved silently down the hallway, his bare feet soundless on the marble floor. The double doors to his office were cracked open. A pale blue glow spilled to the gap, brighter than any desk lamp, pulsing like a heartbeat. He pushed the door open. Florence Hall, the nanny he'd hired just 3 days ago to care for his children, sat at his primary workstation. But she wasn't checking email or browsing the web. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, impossibly fast, her eyes locked on the screen with the kind of focus Miguel only saw in his top engineers during a crisis. But it wasn't the screen that stopped him cold. It was a holographic projection erupting from her laptop, a massive, three-dimensional cascade of glowing code in electric blue and crimson red, rotating slowly in the air like a living organism. Network diagrams, firewall logs, real-time packet traces, the entire architecture of Apex Dynamics security infrastructure, laid bare and suspended in the darkness of his office. Florence didn't look up. Her expression was calm, controlled, terrifyingly intelligent. Nothing like the modest, soft-spoken woman who'd read bedtime stories to his children just hours ago. Miguel's throat went dry, his hands curled into fists. "What the hell are you doing?" She didn't flinch. Her fingers didn't stop. For 3 agonizing seconds, she continued typing, her face illuminated by the cascading code, her lips moving silently as if counting down. Then, with one final keystroke, the red alerts vanished. The holographic display shifted, crimson bleeding to green. A single line of text appeared, floating in the air. System secure. Chimera payload neutralized. Only then did Florence turn to face him. Her eyes met his, steady, unflinching, and filled with something Miguel had spent 20 years learning to recognize in boardrooms and negotiations. Power. "Mr. Gaynor," she said quietly, her voice still carrying that same measured, professional tone she used with his children. "We need to talk about your network security." Miguel stared at her, his entire understanding of reality fracturing in real time. He'd built an empire on reading people, on seeing patterns no one else could see. But he completely missed this. Florence had perfected the art of invisibility long before she became a nanny. The first morning in Miguel Gaynor's penthouse, she'd mapped every corner while the children ate breakfast. The laundry room was ideal, tucked behind the kitchen, separated by 2 doors, with its own ventilation system that masked the faint whir of electronics. She positioned herself there during the twins' nap time, folding tiny shirts with mechanical precision, while her ghost laptop hummed beneath a stack of monogrammed towels. The device looked innocuous. Generic black casing, no manufacturer logos, the kind of budget machine a college student might use. But Florence had gutted it months ago, replacing its internals with military-grade processors and a custom-built network interface that could slip through security protocols like smoke through a keyhole. She worked in 15-minute intervals. Fold, sort, listen for footsteps. Then her fingers would move across the keys, executing reconnaissance scripts she'd written years ago when she still went by her real name in the cybersecurity community. Apex Dynamics' public-facing network perimeter was a fortress, layered defenses, enterprise-grade firewalls, intrusion detection systems that would trigger alarms at the first hint of unauthorized access. Florence didn't touch any of it. Instead, she traced the edges, reading the digital shadows, cataloging the way traffic flowed in and out like a cardiologist studying a heartbeat. What she found made her blood run cold. The attack wasn't loud. It wasn't crude. The signature was almost non-existent. A ghost inside the machine, probing for weaknesses with the patience of a surgeon. Whoever designed this exploit understood systems the way Florence did, knew how to hide in the noise, how to make malicious code look like routine maintenance traffic. She'd seen this pattern before. Once, 3 years ago, in the incident that had ended her career and driven her underground. Florence closed a laptop and returned to folding laundry, her hands steady even as her mind raced through contingencies. The children would wake in 7 minutes. Miguel would be home in 40. She had work to do, but it couldn't look like work. It had to look like nothing at all. That evening, while the twins built elaborate block towers in the living room, Florence asked her first question. "Mr. Gaynor, I noticed the Wi-Fi cuts out sometimes in the children's wing. Is the router in the main office? Or do you have mesh nodes throughout the penthouse?" Miguel glanced up from his tablet, his expression distracted. The dark circles under his eyes had deepened since yesterday. "Security team handles that. There's a central hub in my office and several access points." "Why?" "Oh, just wondering if I should switch networks when I'm back there. Sometimes video calls with my mother lag." Florence smiled, the expression warm and apologetic. "Technology, you know." He nodded absently and returned to his screen, dismissing her concern with the casual indifference of someone who had 1,000 more pressing problems. But 2 days later, Miguel paused in the doorway of the living room. Florence sat cross-legged on the floor, reading a picture book to his daughter Emma, while his son Lucas napped on the couch. Her voice was soft, animated, perfectly calibrated to hold a 5-year-old's attention. Nothing unusual, except her free hand rested on her phone, and Miguel caught a glimpse of the screen before she noticed him watching. It wasn't a text message or social media. It was a terminal window, black background, green text, scrolling too fast for him to read. Code. Florence looked up, and the screen went dark instantly. "Mr. Gaynor, I didn't hear you come in. What were you looking at?" The question came out sharper than he intended. "Oh." She laughed, slightly embarrassed. "A logic puzzle app. I'm addicted to them. Helps me decompress after the kids' energy." She turned the phone toward him, and sure enough, a colorful puzzle interface filled the screen. Miguel studied her for a long moment. Her expression was open, friendly, professional. Exactly what he'd hired her to be. He nodded slowly. "Don't let me interrupt." But as he walked to his office, something nagged at him. The speed of that scrolling text. The way her fingers had moved across the phone surface. Not tapping, but typing. And the question she'd asked about his network topology, delivered with such casual innocence that it sounded like nothing. Almost like nothing. The news broke at 6:47 a.m., 17 minutes before Florence was supposed to start breakfast. She heard Miguel's phone explode with notifications from 3 rooms away, a cascade of chimes and vibrations that didn't stop. Then his voice, low and deadly calm in a way that made her pause mid-step in the hallway. "How many records?" Silence. 240,000. Jesus Christ. Florence changed direction, moving quietly toward the kitchen instead of the children's rooms. Through the partially open door of Miguel's home office, she could see him standing at his desk, still in yesterday's shirt, his hand pressed flat against a mahogany surface, as if physically holding himself upright. "I don't care what the PR team says. Our clients trusted us with their proprietary research data, and now it's on WikiLeaks. We're finished." He listened for a moment, then his voice dropped to something almost hollow. "Call an emergency board meeting. Today." Florence retreated before he could see her, but she'd already heard enough. She pulled out her phone and opened a news aggregator, scrolling until she found the headline. Apex Dynamics suffers massive data breach. Client files leaked. The stock price was already in free fall, down 18% in pre-market trading, down 22% by the time the opening bell rang. Miguel didn't leave his office all morning. Florence kept the children occupied with art projects and educational videos, listening to the muffled rhythm of his voice through the walls. Conference calls that grew progressively shorter and more tense. By noon, he'd stopped answering his phone entirely. She made him lunch anyway, brought it to his office on a tray with coffee, exactly the way he'd mentioned he liked it during her interview. He looked up when she knocked, and for a moment, she saw past the billionaire CEO facade of the man underneath, exhausted, cornered, trying to calculate odds that didn't add up to survival. "Thank you," he said quietly, but he didn't touch the food. Florence nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Florence, if something happened to me, if I had to travel suddenly for business, would you be able to stay with the children? Overnight, I mean. Live in for a while." "Of course, Mr. Gaynor." His jaw tightened. "Good. That's good." She left him there, surrounded by monitors displaying red numbers and descending graphs, and felt the weight of what was coming settle over her like a physical thing. The security chief resigned at 3 p.m. Florence was reading to Emma when she heard Miguel's office door slam open. His voice carried to the penthouse, raw with something between rage and disbelief. "You're walking away? Now, Marcus, I'm paying you $5 million a year." The response was too quiet to hear, but Miguel's bitter laugh wasn't. "Unprecedented. That's your professional assessment? That this attack is just too sophisticated for the entire team I've been funding." A pause. "Then what the hell have I been paying you for?" The call ended. Silence filled the penthouse like a hell breath. That night, after the children were asleep, Florence made her decision. She'd been careful until now. External reconnaissance only, passive observation, keeping her distance from Apex's internal systems. But Miguel's security team was gone. The attack was accelerating. And if she was right about the signature, if this was the same group she'd encountered 3 years ago, they wouldn't stop until they'd stripped Apex down to nothing. The laundry room was dark when she returned to it at midnight. She unfolded her ghost laptop and stared at the login screen for a long moment, weighing consequences. Internal network penetration was a line she'd sworn never to cross again. It meant risk, exposure, the possibility that someone would trace her digital fingerprints back to who she used to be. But Miguel was drowning. His children were sleeping 30 feet away in a home that would be seized by creditors within weeks if Chimera succeeded. And somewhere in Apex's compromised network, innocent people's lives were being sold to the highest bidder. Florence's fingers found the keys. Miguel's home network was a vulnerability. She'd known it from the first day. The penthouse was a hub connecting to Apex's private VPN for his remote work, routing through enterprise-grade encryption that assumed the endpoints were secure. But the mesh nodes she'd asked about so innocently were running outdated firmware, and the IoT devices throughout the penthouse, smart locks, security cameras, even the refrigerator, created a dozen potential entry points. She didn't breach through the front door. She slipped through a side window, exploiting a buffer overflow in the smart thermostat's API, pivoting to the home network until she found the encrypted tunnel to Apex's internal systems. Then she was inside. The network topology materialized on her screen, a sprawling digital city of servers, databases, and security checkpoints. She moved through it like a ghost, leaving no logs, triggering no alarms, reading the flow of malicious traffic that pulsed through compromised systems like poison in veins. The attack was worse than she'd thought. Far worse. And she was the only one who could stop it. Florence worked in the spaces between seconds. While the children ate breakfast, she executed subroutines. While Emma napped, she compiled code. While Lucas practiced his letters, she deployed defensive scripts that wrapped around Apex's core AI servers like invisible armor, polymorphic, adaptive, designed to shift and evolve faster than any signature-based detection could track. The attackers wouldn't see it coming. They were looking for walls and gates, traditional defenses they could probe and exploit. Florence was building something else entirely. A living system that learned from each attack vector, that mimicked legitimate traffic so perfectly it became indistinguishable from the network's own immune response. It was elegant, dangerous, and completely illegal without authorization. She worked in stolen minutes, her ghost laptop hidden in the laundry room, her fingers flying across keys worn smooth by years of muscle memory. The defensive layer grew node by node, wrapping around proprietary AI algorithms that represented Miguel's life's work, creating a fortress he didn't know existed. 3 days into the attack, Miguel stopped leaving his office entirely. Florence could hear him through the walls, his voice hoarse from too many phone calls, each one shorter and more desperate than the last. She recognized the cadence of rejection, the polite corporate language that meant his allies were abandoning him. By the 4th night, the calls had stopped. She found him just after midnight, slumped in his desk chair with an empty glass and a quarter-empty bottle of scotch. The monitors around him displayed cascading red alerts, breach notifications, system failures, data exfiltration warnings that his absent security team was no longer there to address. He didn't look up when she entered. Mr. Gaynor. Florence set a fresh cup of coffee on his desk, black with 1 sugar. The way he took it. The children are asking about you. Tell them I'm working. His voice was flat, defeated. Tell them I'm fixing things. Are you? He laughed, bitter and hollow. No. I'm watching everything I built turn to ash, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Florence picked up the empty glass, buying herself time to choose words carefully. Her tablet sat on the edge of his desk, where she'd set it down, the screen still active. She reached for it, but Miguel's hand shot out faster. What is that? The network topology visualization filled the screen, a 3-dimensional map of Apex's infrastructure with her defensive nodes highlighted in blue, the attacker's payload marked in red. Real-time data flows, encryption protocols, penetration vectors. Florence's heart rate didn't spike. She'd trained herself for this. A puzzle game, she said evenly, taking the tablet from his hands. Graph theory. You connect nodes to optimize flow. She closed the application, and a generic puzzle interface replaced it. Helps me think. Miguel stared at her, his exhausted mind trying to process what he'd seen. That looked like a network diagram. The advanced levels get pretty complex. Florence smiled, professional and warm. You should try to sleep, Mr. Gaynor. Things always look darker at midnight. She left him there, surrounded by his failing empire, while 3 rooms away her laptop continued its silent war, building walls he couldn't see, fighting enemies he didn't understand, protecting everything he was about to lose. The alert hit Miguel's phone at 1:47 a.m. Critical system failure. Core servers under attack. 28 minutes to complete data loss. He stared at the notification for a long moment, feeling nothing. No panic, no desperation. Just a hollow acceptance that this was how it ended. Not with a fight, but with a countdown timer on his phone while he lay in bed, too exhausted to care anymore. The paperwork was already prepared. Chimera Group's acquisition, offer sat in his office, awaiting his signature. Below market value, humiliating terms, but it would save some jobs, protect some of his employees. It was the only move left on the board. Miguel pulled on yesterday's shirt and walked barefoot through the silent penthouse. The city glowed beyond the windows, indifferent to his collapse. 40 floors below, life continued. Above him, the same. Only here, in this suspended moment, did everything fall apart. The double doors to his office were cracked open. He stopped, confusion cutting through his numbness. He'd locked them. He always locked them. The biometric scanner should have blue light spill through the gap, pulsing like a heartbeat. Miguel pushed the door open. Florence Hall sat at his primary workstation, her modest cardigan draped over the chair back, her fingers moving across the keyboard with inhuman speed. But it wasn't the typing that froze him in place. It was a hologram. A massive 3-dimensional projection erupted from her laptop, cascading code in electric blue and crimson red, rotating slowly in the darkness, filling his office with light that painted shadows across the walls. Network diagrams, real-time data streams, security protocols layered in impossible complexity, all of it hovering in the air like a living architecture of light. Miguel's mouth went dry. Florence's expression was pure focus, terrifyingly intelligent. her eyes tracking multiple data flows simultaneously as her fingers executed commands faster than he could follow. The red sections of the hologram pulsed with each keystroke, malicious code being identified, isolated, contained. "What the hell are you doing?" She didn't flinch, didn't stop. Her lips moved silently, counting down, and Miguel realized with jolt that she wasn't just reading the code. She was thinking in it, composing a response in real time that adapted to the attack as it evolved. 10 seconds passed. 15. Then, with one final keystroke, the crimson bled to green. The holographic display shifted. Red alerts vanished. A single line of text appeared, floating in the darkness. "System secure. Chimera payload neutralized." Only then did Florence turn to face him. Her eyes met his, steady, unflinching, filled with a calm authority that had nothing to do with nannies or bedtime stories, or anything he believed about her for the past week. "Mr. Gaynor," she said quietly, her voice still carrying that same measured professionalism, "we need to talk about your network security." Miguel stared at her, his entire understanding of reality fracturing. The hologram continued to rotate between them, bathing them both in blue light, displaying the intricate defensive architecture she'd built around his company without his knowledge, without his permission, without him even suspecting she was capable of thinking beyond children's schedules and meal preparation. "Who are you?" The question came out as a whisper. Florence reached up and closed the holographic display with a gesture. The office plunged into darkness, lit only by the city beyond the windows. "Someone who just saved your empire," she said. "And we have exactly 23 minutes before Chimera realizes their attack failed and tries something desperate." Miguel's hands were shaking. He didn't realize it until he tried to grip the edge of his desk and felt the tremor run through his fingers. "Who the hell are you?" The question came out louder than he intended, echoing in the darkness of his office. Florence remained at his workstation, her posture relaxed, fingers poised over the keyboard as if she'd been sitting there her entire life, as if she belonged there more than he did. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes flicked back to the screen, scanning lines of code that scrolled past too quickly for Miguel to parse. Her expression shifted, a tightening around her eyes, a calculation happening behind them. 23 minutes wasn't accurate, she said calmly. "They're moving faster than I projected. 15, maybe less. Answer the question." Miguel's voice was steel now, the CEO authority he'd built over 2 decades reasserting itself despite the surreal horror of the moment. "Who are you, and what are you doing in my system?" "Saving it." Florence's fingers began moving again, a blur of motion across the keys. New windows opened on the screen, command terminals, network monitors, data streams that branched and converged like blood vessels. "But I need 3 more minutes of silence, Mr. Gaynor. Chimera just activated their contingency protocol." "I don't." 3 minutes. Her voice carried an edge he'd never heard before, not sharp, but absolute. The tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed in situations where seconds meant the difference between success and catastrophe. Miguel fell silent. He watched her work, his mind racing through impossible calculations. The nanny he'd hired had been thoroughly vetted. Background check, references, interviews. Florence Hall was supposed to be a graduate student taking a gap year, someone who needed flexible work while caring for an aging mother. She was supposed to be ordinary. This woman was anything but ordinary. Her fingers never hesitated. Every keystroke was purposeful, precise, part of a larger pattern Miguel could sense but not comprehend. The screen filled with cascading commands, and he caught fragments: exploit mitigation, payload isolation, network segmentation. Technical terminology that shouldn't exist in a nanny's vocabulary. 2 minutes passed. Then 3. Florence typed a final sequence, her hands pausing over the keys for a heartbeat before she pressed enter. The screen flickered. Every red alert vanished simultaneously, replaced by a single message in clean, green text. System secure. All threats neutralized. Network integrity, 100%. She exhaled slowly, then reached up and closed the laptop. The gesture was deliberate, final, like a surgeon stepping back from a completed operation. Only then did she turn to face him. The woman who met Miguel's eyes was not the person he'd hired. The modest posture was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that radiated from her like heat. Her expression was calm, professional, and carried the weight of expertise that couldn't be faked. "My name is Florence Hall," she said evenly, "and I just quarantined and neutralized the Chimera Group's attack on Apex Dynamics." Miguel's throat was dry. "How?" "The security hole was a zero-day exploit in your IoT network." She gestured toward his desk, where his smart coffee maker sat dormant. "Your penthouse has 47 connected devices, Mr. Gaynor. 47 potential entry points into your home network, which connects directly to Apex's VPN. Chimera didn't breach your corporate firewall. They walked through your front door." The words hit him like physical blows. His $5 million security team, his enterprise-grade defenses, his layered protocols, all circumvented by a coffee maker. "But that's not the only problem," Florence continued. "Your security architecture was designed by people who understood threats from 5 years ago. They built walls on walls, encryption on encryption, creating so much complexity that your own systems couldn't distinguish between legitimate traffic and malicious code. Chimera exploited that. They hid in the noise your security created." Miguel found his voice. "And you fixed it. I built a polymorphic defense layer around your core AI servers. It adapts in real time, learns from attack patterns, and mimics your network's natural behavior so perfectly that intrusion detection systems can't distinguish it from routine operations." She paused. "It's also completely illegal without authorization, which is why I'm telling you now instead of letting you discover it later." The admission hung in the air between them. Miguel's mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the person who'd read bedtime stories to his children 6 hours ago. "Who are you?" "Really?" Florence's expression shifted, something guarded and painful flickering across her features before she controlled it. 3 years ago, I was known as the architect," she said quietly. "I was one of the most sought-after cybersecurity experts in the world. And then I made a mistake that cost people everything." She stood, smoothing her modest skirt, the gesture almost offensive. "I walked away, changed my name, tried to be someone who couldn't hurt anyone anymore." Her eyes met his, and Miguel saw something raw there, guilt, grief, determination. "But when I overheard your call last week, when I realized what Chimera was doing and what it would cost, I couldn't walk away again." Miguel stared at her, speechless. His empire had been saved by his nanny. No, not his nanny. By a ghost. The silence stretched between them, heavy with questions Miguel didn't know how to ask. Florence remained standing by his desk, her arms crossed loosely, no longer the deferential employee, but not quite comfortable in whatever role she now occupied. "What happened?" Miguel finally asked. 3 years ago. Florence's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a moment, he thought she might refuse to answer, might retreat back behind the professional mask she'd worn so perfectly. But then she moved to the windows, putting distance between them, her silhouette dark against the glowing city. "I designed a security system for a medical research facility," she said quietly. "Cutting edge, adaptive, impossible to breach, or so I thought. They were developing a new cancer treatment protocol, years ahead of anything else in the field. The data was worth billions, but more than that, it represented hope for thousands of patients." Miguel heard the tension in her voice, the careful control. "The breach happened on a Tuesday morning. Someone found a flaw in my architecture, a single logic error in how the system handled concurrent authentication requests. They exploited it in 47 seconds." She paused, her reflection ghostly in the glass. By the time anyone realized what was happening, they'd stolen everything. Patient records, research data, proprietary algorithms. The facility's reputation was destroyed overnight. The research was set back 5 years. And the patients? Miguel asked, though he already knew the answer. 3 committed suicide when their medical histories were leaked publicly. Dozens more lost jobs, marriages, custody of their children, all because their cancer diagnoses became public knowledge. Florence's voice remained steady, but Miguel heard the fracture beneath it. "I testified at the congressional hearing, took full responsibility. The facility sued me for negligence, and they won. I lost everything, my reputation, my savings, my career. She turned to face him, and the raw pain in her expression made Miguel's chest tighten. But the worst part wasn't the money or the public humiliation. It was knowing that my arrogance, my certainty that I built something perfect, had destroyed innocent lives. Her hands clenched at her sides. So I walked away, changed my name, moved across the country, found work that couldn't hurt anyone. I convinced myself that being ordinary was safer than being brilliant. Miguel absorbed this, his mind automatically cataloging the implications. But you're still brilliant. Yes. The word was quiet, almost apologetic. I can't turn that off. I see systems everywhere, patterns, vulnerabilities, elegant solutions to impossible problems. Working as a nanny didn't change that. It just meant I had no one to share it with. The confession hung between them, and Miguel felt something shift in his understanding. He'd built Apex Dynamics on the principle that genius could be bought, that talent was a commodity to be acquired and managed. He'd paid millions for the best security team money could buy, surrounded himself with experts who spoke the language of credentials and certifications. And they'd all failed. But Florence, who he'd hired for $25 an hour to read bedtime stories and prepare meals, had saved everything. The humiliation should have been crushing. Instead, Miguel felt a strange clarity settling over him, like the moment in a complex negotiation when the true structure finally reveals itself. My security chief told me the attack was unprecedented, he said slowly, that no one could have stopped it. He was wrong. Florence's tone was matter-of-fact. The attack was sophisticated, but not unprecedented. Chimera used a modified version of the Stuxnet architecture, combined with social engineering tactics. Any expert who'd studied state-sponsored cyber warfare would have recognized the signature. But your team was excellent at following protocols and implementing standard defenses, but Chimera wasn't using standard attacks. She moved back toward the desk, her posture relaxing slightly. You needed someone who thinks like the attackers do. Someone who understands that the most dangerous vulnerabilities aren't in the code. They're in the assumptions we make about what's possible. Miguel sat down heavily in his chair, the exhaustion of the past weeks finally catching up with him. He'd built an empire on reading patterns, on seeing connections others missed. He'd made his first million by recognizing that the market was valuing companies based on outdated metrics. He'd scaled to billions by understanding that digital infrastructure was a foundation of every future industry. But he'd missed the most important pattern of all. I've been alone for 2 years, he said quietly, since the divorce. I stopped trusting anyone who wasn't on my payroll, and even then, I second-guessed everything. I thought control meant doing everything myself, seeing everything, approving every decision. And you nearly lost everything because of it, Florence finished. Yes. Miguel looked up at her, seeing clearly for the first time since she'd arrived. But you saved it, without asking permission, without needing approval. You saw what needed to be done, and you did it, even though it meant risking exposure, even though I might have prosecuted you for unauthorized access. I couldn't let it happen again, Florence said simply. I couldn't watch another organization collapse because I was too afraid to act. Miguel leaned back, a pattern crystallizing in his mind with sudden, perfect clarity. Florence wasn't just someone who'd save his company. She was a solution to the fundamental problem that had been destroying him. His inability to trust anyone with real power, his isolation at the top of an empire built on control. She'd proven she could do what his entire security team couldn't. More importantly, she'd proven she would act in his interests even when it cost her safety, even when it meant revealing herself. I need you, Miguel said, the words surprising him with their honesty. Not as a nanny, as a partner. Florence's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her composure. What are you offering? Everything, Miguel said, and I'm going to explain exactly what that means. 6 weeks later, Florence stood at the head of the Apex Dynamics boardroom, a holographic display rotating slowly behind her as 16 executives watched in rapt attention. The polymorphic defense architecture has eliminated 97% of intrusion attempts in the first month, she said, her voice calm and authoritative. The remaining 3% are being used as learning data to further refine the system's adaptive capabilities. She was dressed differently now, a tailored blazer over a silk blouse, her hair pulled back in a sleek style that spoke of competence and power. The transformation was complete, yet somehow she remained fundamentally herself. "What about the nonprofit initiative?" asked the CFO, a woman who'd been skeptical of Florence's appointment until the quarterly security reports proved undeniable. "Digital Guardians launched last week. We've already partnered with 43 schools and 12 community health centers." Florence advanced the presentation, showing data visualizations that Miguel recognized as her signature style: elegant, intuitive, impossible to misinterpret. Return on investment isn't measured in dollars here, but in lives protected and future secured. The board members nodded, some making notes, others simply absorbing the reality that Apex Dynamics had been rebuilt in 6 weeks by the woman they'd initially questioned hiring. Miguel watched from his seat at the far end of the table, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years: pride that had nothing to do with stock prices or market dominance. Florence had transformed his company's security from a liability into an industry benchmark. More than that, she'd given Apex a purpose beyond profit. The meeting concluded at 4:47 p.m. Florence fielded questions for another 10 minutes, then checked her watch with subtle urgency Miguel had learned to recognize. "If there's nothing else," she said smoothly, "I have another commitment." She gathered her materials, laptop, tablet, the portable holographic projector she designed herself, and headed for the elevator. Miguel fell into step beside her. "Emma has a dance recital tonight," Florence said as the doors closed. "I promised I'd help her with her hair." "I know. I'll be home by 6. Florence glanced at him, a small smile playing at her lips. "You've made every event for 3 weeks straight." "She's noticed." "So have I." They rode in comfortable silence, and Miguel marveled at the strangeness of it. His chief security officer rushing home to braid his daughter's hair, the same woman who'd addressed the board with unquestionable authority, now planning bedtime routines and reading schedules. The dual life should have been impossible. Instead, it was perfect. Florence left first, her car already waiting. Miguel watched her go, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, transformed once again from executive to the person his children ran to when he came home. That night, after the recital, after Emma's triumphant curtain call and Lucas's elaborate retelling of his school day, Miguel stood in the doorway of the children's room. Florence sat between them on Emma's bed, reading the final chapter of a book they'd been working through for weeks. Her voice was soft, animated, completely different from the boardroom authority. Emma leaned against her shoulder. Lucas held her hand. Miguel felt something unknot in his chest, a tension he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. His insomnia had vanished 3 weeks ago. He slept now, deeply and dreamlessly, his mind finally quiet. The panic that had defined his existence for 2 years had been replaced by something he'd almost forgotten existed: peace. Not because the threats were gone, they never would be, but because he'd finally learned to trust someone capable of facing them. Someone who protected not just his empire, but the things that actually mattered. Florence looked up, caught his eye, and smiled. And Miguel understood with perfect clarity that he'd found something more valuable than any security system or defensive architecture. He'd found partnership. Real, complete, transformative partnership. The kind that saved everything worth saving. Miguel closed the bedroom door softly, leaving the nightlight glowing behind him. Florence emerged moments later, her professional demeanor settling back into place like a familiar coat. "They're asleep," she said quietly. "Emma wants to show you her new dance tomorrow." "I'll be there." Miguel meant it. These days, he always meant it. They walked together to the penthouse living room, the city spreading out beneath them like a circuit board of light. Florence moved to collect her things, the laptop bag, the tablet, the remnants of her dual existence. "Florence," Miguel said, and she paused. "Thank you for everything you've done, for everything you continue to do." She smiled, genuine and warm. "You're paying me extremely well for it." "That's not what I mean." "I know." She tilted her head, studying him with that same analytical intensity she brought to security architecture. You're different than you were 6 weeks ago. Calmer. Present. I have you to thank for that, too. No, Florence corrected gently. You did that yourself. I just showed you it was possible. Miguel moved to the window, hands in his pockets, watching their reflections overlap with the city lights. I spent 20 years building an empire on the belief that control meant never trusting anyone completely, that partnerships were just strategic alliances waiting to collapse. And now I understand that real security doesn't come from walls and firewalls. It comes from having someone you trust absolutely watching your back. He turned to face her. Someone brilliant enough to see threats I'll never recognize, and committed enough to stop them even when it costs her. Florence's expression softened. We're partners, Miguel. That's what partners do. The word hung between them. Partners, carrying weight that went beyond corporate titles or equity stakes. It meant shared purpose, mutual trust, the understanding that some things mattered more than profit margins or market dominance. Get some rest, Florence said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. The board wants that quarterly security briefing moved up to Monday. I'll have my notes ready. She paused at the door, glancing back. And Miguel, Emma really does want you at that dance tomorrow. Don't let the quarterly reports become an excuse. Never again, he promised, after she left. Miguel stood alone in the quiet penthouse, feeling the absence of the panic that used to fill these moments. No racing thoughts. No catastrophic scenarios playing out in his mind. Just peace. His phone buzzed, a notification from Apex's security system. He glanced at it out of habit, then smiled. All systems secure. Network integrity, 100%. Digital Guardian's milestone, 50 organizations protected. Florence's architecture, working flawlessly in the background, just like Florence herself. Brilliant, protective, transforming everything she touched. Miguel set the phone down and headed to bed. For the first time in years, he knew he'd sleep soundly, because the empire was secure, his children were safe, and tomorrow he'd watch his daughter dance. Want more stories like this? Subscribe for exclusive tales of hidden genius, unexpected partnerships, and the moments that change everything. Because the best transformations happen when we finally learn to trust the brilliance we never saw coming. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.